In May 1987, Paul Prenter sold everything he knew about Freddie Mercury to the Sun newspaper for £32,000. He sold the sexuality. He sold the names of the men. He sold the photographs. He sold the headline, AIDS kills Freddie's two lovers. He sold 11 years of proximity, of private access, of being the man closest to Freddie Mercury's inner life at the precise moment when Freddie Mercury most needed that inner life to stay private. He sold all of it. Freddie Mercury read every word. Peter Freestone, who was there, has described what happened when Freddie saw the story. He read it without a great performance, without the theatrical fury one might expect from Freddie Mercury receiving a betrayal at this scale. He read it. He absorbed it. He went very quiet. And then he sent Paul Prenter a message. That message has never been described publicly in its full content. Prenter died in August 1991, 3 months before Freddie Mercury died, of the same disease. Whatever the message said, Prenter took it with him. This is the story of what Paul Prenter was, what he did, what it cost, and what was sent to him at the end of it. Paul Prenter was born in London in 1946, raised in Belfast. He met Freddie Mercury at a bar in 1975. By 1977, he was Freddie's personal manager. For the next 9 years, he was one of the most constant presences in Freddie Mercury's private life, not a bandmate, but the gatekeeper. The person who managed the appointments, the travel, the access. Who got through the door, and who did not. Brian May and Roger Taylor did not like him. They blamed his influence for Hot Space in 1982, the album that divided the fan base and strained the band's relationship with their audience. They were not wrong about the influence, but the influence was real because the relationship was real. Freddie Mercury kept Paul Prenter around for 9 years. That does not happen without genuine attachment. The relationship between Freddie Mercury and Paul Prenter was not simply professional. This is the dimension that makes the 1987 betrayal what it was, rather than simply what it would have been if it had come from a stranger. Prenter's brothers dispute the specific nature of the relationship. They deny the sexual dimension that has been reported in various accounts. What is not disputed is the closeness. The daily proximity. The specific kind of intimacy that develops between a person who is extraordinarily famous and the one person whose job is to manage the gap between that person and the world. Prenter knew everything. He knew the names of the men. He knew the parties and what happened at them. He knew the diagnosis conversation or claim to. He said in the 1987 story that Freddie had called him in a panic when the AIDS diagnosis arrived. He said he was the person Freddie reached for. Whether this was true or whether it was the enhancement of a story already purchased, whether Prenter was the person Freddie reached for, or whether he simply inserted himself into that account after the fact is not knowable now. What is knowable is that he was close enough to know what he sold, and that he sold it, and that he sold it. For £32,000. The specific amount matters. Not because £32,000 is a large sum in the context of Freddie Mercury's life and career, and the value of what was sold, it is an almost contemptibly small amount, but because £32,000 had a specific meaning in Paul Prenter's life in May 1987. He had been fired by Freddie Mercury in 1986. He had been dismissed after 9 years, and he had, by 1987, been diagnosed with HIV. In Britain in 1987, HIV treatment was expensive, and access to it was complicated. Paul Prenter needed money. His brothers have given this as the explanation, not the justification they are careful to say, but the explanation. He was bitter about the firing. He was frightened about the diagnosis. He needed the money, and he had the material, and the Sun was buying. The specific combination of bitterness and fear and need is not the same thing as pure malice. Brian May has said as much. He made many mistakes, but he wasn't entirely a bad person. But the calculation that produced the decision is not the same thing as the betrayal not being a betrayal. It was both things. The calculation was real. The betrayal was real. The headline ran on May 1987. AIDS kills Freddie's two lovers.It named men who had been in Freddie Mercury's life and who had died. John Murphy. Tony Baston. Their names, in a tabloid, attached to a disease that in 1987 carried a specific and devastating stigma connected to Freddie Mercury, whose HIV status had not been publicly confirmed and who had made the specific decision to keep it private for as long as he could. Prenter also provided photographs. Private photographs. The specific photographs of a person's private life that exist because someone trusted is present when private things are documented. His relationship with Jim Hutton, the man he loved, the man who would be at his bedside when he died, was named and detailed the specific sexuality that Freddie Mercury had managed carefully, publicly. For his entire career was exposed in the language of a tabloid that understood exactly what it was selling and to whom all the Queen's men ran a subsequent headline. The material was comprehensive. The photographs were real. The information was accurate. And it came from someone who had been trusted with all of it for 9 years. Freddie Mercury read the story. Peter Freestone was present. He has described what the reading looked like. Not the theatrical fury of a Freddie Mercury performance. Not the specific and colorful rage that Freddie was capable of when he was performing his feelings. He read it quietly. He absorbed it in the specific way of someone receiving information they already knew at some level was possible, from someone they already knew at some level was capable of it. The knowledge that someone close to you might betray you is not the same as the betrayal happening. But it is also not nothing. Freddie had kept Prenter around for 9 years. He had absorbed the friction with Brian and Roger. He had absorbed the hot space criticism. He had trusted the gatekeeper with the gate. And now the gatekeeper had sold the gate and everything behind it for £32,000. Peter Freestone says Freddie went very quiet. Then Freddie said one thing about the money. If Paul needed money for his treatment, he merely had to ask. I would have paid. A gesture of magnanimity performed for the room. Simply the statement of a fact. If Paul needed money, he could have asked. He didn't ask. He sold. Then Freddie Mercury sent Paul Prenter a message. The existence of this message is documented in various accounts from people who were close to Freddie in this period. Its content is not. Nobody who was present when it was written has described what it said. Nobody who was present when Prenter received it has described what it said. Paul Prenter, who died in Belfast in August 1991, took the content of the message with him. What is known, the message was sent. What is not known, what it said. Was it rage? Was it grief? Was it the specific and precise articulation of what the betrayal cost, written by a man who understood language as a performer and who knew exactly how to use it? Was it something simpler, a single sentence, a single line, the distillation of a 9-year relationship into the fewest possible words? Was it nothing, a blank page, the specific silence that says more than words? Nobody knows. Prenter never described it publicly. His brothers, who have spoken about his life with considerable care and grief in the years since, have not said what it contained. The message was sent. The message was received. And then Paul Prenter died. And the message went with him. The message went with him. This is the specific quality of the Prenter story that makes it different from the other betrayal stories in the Queen archive. Most betrayals leave a record. The person who was betrayed describes it. The person who did the betraying defends it. The accounts accumulate on both sides and produce a version of events that the public can navigate. The Prenter betrayal has only one side. Freddie Mercury's side, in the form of what he said to Peter Freestone, and what he sent to Prenter, and what he chose never to speak about publicly. And Prenter's brother's side, which is the side of people who love someone who did something wrong, and who want the world to understand that the wrong came from somewhere real. But Prenter's own side, what he thought he was doing, what he told himself when he sold the story, what he felt when the message from Freddie arrived, is not available. He died before the age of full posthumous disclosure. He died of the same disease that he had named in the headline. He died in August 1991, 3 months before Freddie Mercury died. Both of them, gone before the world finished asking questions. Brian May has said, in more than one account, that Paul Prenter was not entirely a bad person. This is not a trivial statement from a man who watched Prenter damage the band he had spent his life building, the hot space sessions, the management decisions, the isolation that kept Brian and Roger at a distance from Freddie. Brian May did not like Paul Prenter. He has been clear about this. And yet, not entirely a bad person. This is the moral complexity the film Bohemian Rhapsody chose not to navigate. The film needed a villain. Prenter was dead. He could not defend himself. The reality is a man who spent 9 years in genuine proximity to one of the most extraordinary artists of the 20th century was then discarded, was frightened and bitter and ill, and made a decision in that condition. He lived with it. He died with it. He took the message with him. What the betrayal cost Freddie Mercury is not a single thing. The privacy he had managed carefully for his entire career was breached in print, permanently. The names of the men were in a newspaper under a headline connecting them to a disease and a death. Jim Hutton, still alive, still the person Freddie loved, was named. The trust placed in the gatekeeper was gone. Peter Freestone has described Freddie after the story as someone who drew a specific lesson. The innermost circle had to be smaller. Proximity was a risk. The warmth that made Freddie Mercury who he was in private was also the vulnerability that made the Prenter story possible. He drew the circle smaller. He let fewer people in. He kept what remained to be kept with the people he was certain of. He kept what remained to be kept with the people he was certain of. Peter Freestone. Mary Austin. Jim Hutton. The 3 people who were at Garden Lodge in the years after 1987, who were present for the illness, for the recording sessions, for the end. Not Paul Prenter. Prenter had been outside the circle since 1986, fired, distant. The relationship over in the 1987 story confirmed that the firing had been the right decision and that the distance should have come sooner, but the confirmation arrived at a cost. The story was out. The photographs were published. The men's names were in the newspaper. The headline existed. And Freddie Mercury, who had the specific gift of performance, who could take anything and make it into something, absorbed the betrayal into the structure of his private life and continued. He kept recording. He kept working. He made the miracle. He made innuendo. He recorded Made in Heaven. He kept going. The way he always kept going. The way the work was the answer to everything the world did to him. Paul Prenter returned to Belfast after 1987. His brothers were there. He was ill. He was not famous. He was not the person in the newspapers. He was a man from Belfast who had been close to something extraordinary and who had ended the proximity with a decision he had to live with. His brothers say he was hurt. He felt abandoned. The firing had left him without resources for his own treatment. He told himself the story was necessary. Whether he believed this, whether in the quiet of a Belfast house he was able to convince himself, or whether he carried the weight without relief, his brothers have not said. What they have said, he was their brother. He was more than the headline. The film made him a cartoon. The truth was more complicated. They are right about the complications. Paul Prenter died in Belfast in August 1991. 4 years old. Of AIDS. The same disease he had named in the headline 4 years earlier. The same disease that would kill Freddie Mercury 3 months later. No tribute concert. No public announcement. He died in his home city with his brothers present. Whether Freddie knew whether the news reached Garden Lodge in August 1991 and registered as news about a person who once mattered completely and then mattered differently is not documented. The death happened. And 3 months later, Freddie Mercury died in London. And the message was already at rest in Belfast, where Paul Prenter had taken it. Paul Prenter had taken it. This is the specific irony of the Prenter story. The man who sold everything he knew about Freddie Mercury took the one thing that mattered most to the story with him when he died. He sold the sexuality, the photographs, the names, the headline. He kept the message. Not strategically, simply by dying before anyone asked him what it said. He died in August 1991. The interviewers who might have asked were not yet asking. The biography industry around Freddie Mercury had not yet fully formed. The documentary makers who would eventually want to know were not yet making documentaries. He died before the question was properly posed. And the message, which exists in the record only as a fact Freddie sent it, Prenter received it. Its content is unknown, became one of the permanent gaps in the Queen archive. Not because anyone chose to keep it from the world, because both of the people who knew what it said were dead before the world thought to ask. The message was real. Its content is gone. May 1987. The Sun newspaper. 30, 2,000 pounds. AIDS kills Freddie's two lovers. Paul Prenter sold everything he knew. Freddie Mercury read every word. He went very quiet. He said, if Paul needed money for his treatment, he merely had to ask.Then. He sent a message. The content of the message, unknown. The effect of the message, unknown. Paul Prenter returned to Belfast. He was ill. He was his brother's brother. He was more than the headline. He died in August 1991. Of the same disease named in the headline. Freddie Mercury died 3 months later. Of the same disease. Both of them. Gone. The message. Gone with Prenter. The betrayal. Documented. Total. 32,000 pounds, and a headline and private photographs in a newspaper. What Freddie sent back, one message. Unknown content. Permanent gap. The story ends there. With the thing unsaid. With the thing sent, but not recorded. With two men who had once been in each other's innermost circle, dying 3 months apart, of the same disease, having said to each other at the end, and in private something the world will never know.